Well, here's a request that reached quite a ways back in history. This person says, I'd love a quick tip on painting items that look three-dimensional. My favorite painting is a print of an old wooden chair with an old wooden mill bucket turned planter, an A-frame birdhouse, and a small clay pot. It looks like you could reach through and pick up the items. Please explain this concept. That really is reaching back into history. Well, with all the different styles of painting and approaches to painting, these days we don't see this very much anymore. The term does reach back into history, and the term is a French term, and it's pronounced, here's the word right here spelled like this, pronounced trompe l'oeil. Now what it means is fool the eye or deceive the eye. And that is when a painting is done so meticulously that every shadow is captured, every little thing is captured, that makes it look like you could actually reach into the painting and pick up the images or the objects that are in there. It's a very meticulous technique. I'm going to do a very brief, I try to keep it brief because we like to keep these quick tips short enough. So I'm going to do a very brief run over what is necessary for doing this style of painting. Very meticulous and very time consuming. So right here we have an example of, and this sample comes out of the 1800s. This painter, Harnett, loved this trompe l'oeil kind of approach to painting. And you can see even the frame is a part of the painting itself, where the lock is actually painted, the shadow of the lock on the frame and whatever. You can see he's very careful to put in all those cast shadows and to make them blend out and gradate out in such a way that it really feels like you could reach in and pick up those items. So what I'll do, first of all, is go through with you certain steps that you need to take in order to approach a trompe l'oeil painting, if that's what you're interested in doing. And I think it's not a bad idea if you're excited about painting. It's not a bad idea to just play with doing this approach at least one time to get the feel of how it works, and then you can decide at what point you want your painting to be either finished or realistic or whatever. Oh, by the way, today you'll hear the term extreme realism to describe this same approach or the same principle of a painting that looks as if you can reach right in to it and pick up the images and pick up the objects. So I have a picture of grapes here. We see lots of still life paintings. Usually they are still life because they're so time consuming, and usually the paintings are done from real still life, not photographs, because photographs distort the images in such a way that it really will then end up looking more like a photograph than the real thing. But I have to show you with a photograph so we can have the same point of view. So grapes is a theme that appears in a lot of trompe l'oeil paintings, and I thought, well, we'll just take a single grape and I can show you very briefly how the principle works. There are 5 general steps that you need to take yourself through in order to create a painting in this style. The first is a keen observation of the shape and placing the shape where you see it. So keen observation of shape, and I'll just take these one step at a time. Keen observation of shape. I'm going to use one of these grapes and just pace you through the steps that you can take yourself through, and you could go on to Pixabay and find something like this and even isolate it. You can see this is this little section of the grapes right here. So I'll just take this one right here. And so what I would do then, I would carefully draw that shape and place it the way I see it. Now, as in the previous quick tip about rounding shapes, which I think this one probably was a comment on, I showed you ways to round the shape to get the shape asymmetrical and rounded, but to use angles to do it. So very briefly, I'll take you through that again. Now what I'm going to do is just with a little bit of Gamsol in my brush, pick up a little bit of color, and it doesn't matter really what color as long as it's dark enough to see. So I'll pick up just a little bit of color. In this case it's the ultramarine blue. Looking at this shape now, I can start at the top like this. Now see there's a slight angle right there. I can go this way and see there's a slight angle there. Then it turns abruptly and goes down like that. Then it turns and takes on a vertical. Then it turns again and goes like that. Then it turns again and goes like that. On the other side, it turns like that. It drops to a vertical there. It turns again and goes like that. And then like that. Now then if I look at that, I'll see I got the general shape, but I didn't get quite the angle on that shape. So you see what I mean? It requires that you are very meticulous in getting the shape. So what I'll do is I'll reshape, and I'll just come right in here to make this move down just a little bit more. Right there, like that. Whoops, don't have quite enough, there we go. And then give that just a little bit more of an angle at the bottom. And then I'll do the same thing over here. Again, keen observation. It's really a great shape like an egg, but it requires that you pay close attention to the actual shape. All right, that's the shape and that's the placement. Placing it vertically like I see it there, placing it in the shape I see it. Now, the next step after you get the shape placed and drawn, and that would be the shapes of everything you see in the still line. The next step then would be light and shadow. So to get the light and shadow, I'm going to go to something else I've done here. One way we have today that was available to artists back in the 1800s, 1700s, is that they would have to squint and locate and isolate the shadows from the lights. Now, you need to be able to see that in order to do a trompe-l'oeil painting. Now here we've got the No 10 that we've adapted to the shadow and light pattern, and I've done that here on the computer. I've thrown that into simply areas of shadow. We can see here where all the grape here is thrown into shadow, and there's deep, deep shadow around it. And then areas of light. You see, really there's very little light. Now that tells us what value range we will be working in for each of these areas. So the area of shadow will be in this value range right here. This is important, and it's another step that we pay attention to when we're doing this style of painting. So the area of shadow will be right in here, and that means wherever these areas are, right in there, I won't get the paint any lighter in value than what we're seeing right here. And then the areas in light appear on this side of the value scale. So that's the shadow and light. Now, the next step, and you can make yourself a diagram of that, or you can actually put that on the canvas here. I think maybe I'll just go ahead and do that very briefly, because that's what I usually do anyway when I'm doing my own work. So what I would do there then, just again in a very light wash, what I would do here now is I need to paint enough of the paint in the brush for it to work. In a very light wash right here now, what I will do is I'll simply scrub in that pattern of light and shadow where I see it. And that then becomes a guide. Now, the artists of the Trompe artists of the old days would have different ways of doing that. Some would go ahead and block in the shadow areas directly. But there are different approaches according to who the artist is. Now, I want to be sure I get that angle. That's important. I get the angle of that shadow right there. I get the angle here, and I get the angle there. Now, I do that by squinting if I'm looking at the image itself. If you squint and look at this image, you squint down so that you don't see anything but light and shadow. You see this pattern right in here. So that pattern is important when you're doing the style of painting. Really, it's important in all painting. So that is step 2, where you have discerned light and shadow. Step 3 is what colors are you going to use for the light, for the shadows, and for the lights. Now that happens on the palette, and I've already put colors out on the palette, but I want to guide you through identifying. If you really want to do this, take it slow. So I like using the color wheel to identify the lights and shadows. I mean the colors for the lights and shadows, the colors for the shadows, and the colors for the light. What are we seeing right here? And one thing that happens to a lot of people when they're painting, they'll look at something like that and call it purple, or they'll call it violet. Then they reach down, pick up some violet, and put it down and hope it works. It may work, it may not. If you're doing this sort of painting, that is no way to go. We look at exactly what colors we're seeing. And so if we're looking on the color wheel, we're seeing that these colors live in this range right in here. You see that? They are living right there in that range. If you look at let's look at just the shadow colors first of all. You see the shadow color right in here is leaning a little bit more towards violet. And we see that when we move down the grape right here in the very deep shadows, you see more violet, but you see more of the red violet right in here where the reflective light, that's a transparent image. So you'll see that reflective light, and you see that changes there to red violet. That means that we need on the palette the ability to work between violet and red violet. Now I've set up some potentials here. For the red part, if we choose a red that is the deepest, darkest red we have and the most transparent, then we can, to raise the value of that red with a middle value red that is the highest saturation. Now this one, you see I've done this little value line. This value line of color represents just the shadow part. Just the shadow part. The part here, right in here on the value scale. And so what I've done here is I've taken that full red, which is as close to a true highly saturated red as I have available in my collection of tubes. So I've raised the value, I've mixed it with alizarin crimson. This will enable me to get the brilliance of this color. If I had just added white to alizarin crimson, it would get dull. So these are considerations we use when we're doing this sort of painting. What are you actually seeing, and what do you need to set up here to do it? And I may or may not have needed this color. This is a red violet. It's this particular one is quinacridone violet, and this is ultramarine blue. Now the ultramarine blue, you can see, I may or may not need it. I may need it for getting the violet just a little bit blue, or I may not. But the idea is to give yourself potential. All right, so that would be setting the colors. Then the next step is the colors for the light, and of course the colors for light. In this case, if you look closely, you can see that doesn't have any red left in it. That just feels like a violet mixed with white. So we have that when we have white on the canvas. So we set those colors up, and then we block in. Now, this is really block in right here, the setting up the colors and using the colors. Now let me show you how that works. So first of all, we start out with a wide brush, and with the Trompe technique or painting, the The softer brushes work better. Now, applying the first layers of paint with the bristle brushes works just fine, but because you're going to be refining so much towards the end, the softer brushes work better. So to apply the colors for the shadow, we would be blocking in. And now what we would do is to find those colors and just block them in. Not paint them as we see them, but block them in. And so this is what we'll do right now. Now I'm seeing down here, I like to start in the darkest part first. I'm seeing down there the violet. And so what I will do now, that's a very dark violet, so I'll reach for the red violet right here. I'll mix some blue in it to get it closer to violet, like this, and move it in, lighten that up just a little bit so I can see. And I compare. Before putting that color down, I compare. Do I have there the color that I'm looking at? Alright, so now I'm just going to I'm just going to block in the placement of that color. Just very gesturally. Now here I'm allowing my brush to follow the shape I'm seeing, which is a good way to get that started. Not very much paint at this stage. As thin, but no medium. As thin as you can get the paint, or as it comes out of the tube, meaning you don't put terrific amounts of paint on the brush itself. Alright, so let's just block in where we see that violet. And I think I see it right in there. And I do see, let's go around the edge of it right there, like that. Now, as it moves, as that violet moves up into that shadow area, we see that violet getting a little lighter. Now, this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to move up into this mixture of the red because I want that to be still relatively brilliant. In other words, I don't want that violet to get dull. And so if I use that more saturated version of the red as I'm moving up the value scale, I can keep that violet from getting dull. Now let's see do I have it? I believe so. So I'll block that in. Now just block it in. I need to pull the paint off the brush there. Just block it in with broad strokes to begin with. So just block that in like this. And we could go ahead and do some blending at this point with those edges, but at this point, if we're just placing color, we give our attention to the color that we're placing rather than to the technique of blending. Now, I'm seeing in here a redder violet, and that's where I reach into here now, and I grab that red, and I'll see there's the redder violet. Now we're beginning to see something of that kind of glow that we see here. And I'll move that up now. And now as I move it up, I'm going to change my brush stroke to come down the side of the image itself, still placing in those shadow colors. So, alright, and I'm going to use a little bit of a scrubbing motion now. I don't want to overdo, you see, I don't want to lose that glow of that red in that violet there. And then I will move up just a little bit more. I'm not ready to hit the light yet. I'm still in the shadow area. But I'm going to move up just a little bit more now, up the value scale towards what we call, that would be shallow shadow area. And it begins to get a little bit more violet there, leaning a little bit more towards the violet, almost the blue violet than it does down here. And that is more closely, that is closer to what I'm doing right here. You see that? Now let's see, we see a little bit of that moving down like that. And there we go, like that. You see it's a very subtle change in value. Now let's get that, raise that value just a bit more, right up in here as we pull it down. And see, we're constantly adjusting. Now, at this point, Let's pull that little bit of that shadow right up in there. At this point, we've got that shadow in the background. And without that shadow in the background, that very dark shadow area in the background, we're not able to really see that as the trompe l'oeil. It's just going to look like a purple image floating in space. So what I'll do there, now this shows us, let's take this away for a moment, that just shows black. If we were seeing it in reality, we would see something other than black. We'd see some sort of imagery. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go into ultramarine blue on this side, and I'm going to put some red orange into ultramarine blue and get a dark blue and almost black blue, and then I'm going to just place it. Now here you see there I've got a very dark value. I'm just going to place it against the image, and this would be an opportunity to reshape by the outside, from the outside, to reshape any part of the image that didn't quite fall into the shape I'm looking at. And so where I'm right here, where I corrected, I might move that in and reshape and just pull the brush right around, keep those edges nice and smooth, and I'm just going to throw this in. It's going to be very much like what I see up there. Now you can see already how we begin to feel that relationship between the dark and the light there. All right, going to keep moving that, and now when I get on this side, I'm going to look here again, and I'm looking at the shape, and I'm going to kind of ease in, and I'm going to squeeze into that shape just a little bit, get it a little bit more accurate. There we go. That's called correcting from the negative, or painting in the negative when we're using the negative shape to correct the positive shape. I'm going to replenish the blue here. A little bit more of that blue down so that we can do that. Now I'm going to very rapidly now work that background in. And in fact, this would be a place where we could really put it on fast speed mode if we wanted to, so that you can see, but not rapidly around the shape itself, because there I'm looking here to be sure that that shape is exactly what I'm looking at there. Now, this is not expressive painting. This is not interpretive painting. This is plain downright copying. It's you're copying what your eyes are seeing. And let's see if I can get that, keep my hand out of the, I probably am not keeping my hand out of the camera here. Very carefully. Move that edge around very carefully. Now, I almost screwed that edge up. And if anybody wants to ask, what if you do screw the edge up from the outside? Well, best thing to do is keep going. You start correcting at this stage and uncorrecting, you can get a mess, and you get yourself in a mess. So always the best policy in painting is to keep moving forward and not second guess yourself. Just keep going. Now, we don't want to leave evidence of the brushstroke anywhere in Trompe l'oeil painting. That's one of the differences between Trompe l'oeil painting and expressive painting. In expressive painting, we leave evidence of the brush. We let the brush strokes be a part of the painting, not in Trompe l'oeil. In Trompe l'oeil painting, you don't want to show any evidence of the brush stroke whatsoever. So that means that all brush strokes get totally smoothed out. And that's the one reason why we keep the paint from getting thick. We're careful that we don't put that paint on too thick. And it's also a good reason not to use mediums at this age. Just depend upon the paint and depend upon the application of the paint to be covering the surface, but not thickly. But can you sort of see now what the effect we get? Now, get those edges. I could control that better if I had my maul stick, but I don't want to do that. Now I'm going to rinse the brush now. You can see already we're almost getting a trompe l'oeil effect. Just by carefully not allowing brush strokes to show, and very carefully placing those colors and values. So I'm going to move very carefully now into the light areas. Now to do that, I move over to the other side because something different is happening in the light color. Something's different is happening. That usually is the case. When the light is hitting really, really strongly, the colors change. In this case, you can see, you don't see any of the red up here. You only see that violet, and you don't see much of it. And we see a white ream of light around all that. So I'll pull some light down. This is white, just plain titanium white. So we'll pull that down, and I'm going to move into the violet. Now I'm going to pick up the violet. I'll mix that. Pick up some ultramarine blue right here and mix it with this, and keep that leaning towards violet. Let's see now. Oh, I'm on the wrong side. There we go. Now I'm going to keep working that until I get the right color. It needs to be a little bit more red. So we're not just aiming for a general violet. We need to get exactly what we're looking at. So I'll start right here and place that color right there, right next to the darker part, and then gradually let it gradually get lighter as it goes towards the edge. But you can see that rim of light on the edge, so we don't have to put that in yet. So just go right to the edge. Okay, now comes the blending part. Now remember I said I'm showing you a really truncated version, and I know this is a longer quick tip than our quick tips usually are, but normally just to do this work on a shape like this, you would be spending an hour or two perhaps. But I just want to show you the truncated version. Now first of all, I'm going to blend. I want smooth blends within this color. So the best way to get that blend is to wipe off the brush and hold it at an angle like this and give it a zigzag movement. And as you give the zigzag movement, then move around it. And we don't want to see any edge to where that light picks up and the shadow leaves off. We don't see any edge there whatsoever. So we work it with a soft brush. And I'll do the same thing down here and same thing down here. I'm not going to take this to a complete finish, a complete trompe l'oeil, because it would be entirely too long. I just want to take it far enough for you to see. Now for that white, in this case, we can just get a much, much lighter version of that violet, and would simply very carefully blend that in. And because you've got that dark on the edge, you don't want to hit it more than when you're blending. You don't want to keep working it back and forth because you get that dark mixed in with it. Now I'm going to give a little bit more emphasis to the white. Move it over there, just leave it. A little bit more emphasis to the white. Move it right to the edge over here and leave it. I had a little bit of a shaky hand there. Now wipe that brush off, and I want to blend it. Don't want any evidence of the brush stroke left. And when you know some hairs come off the brush, just as when I'm doing this. Now the next thing is the refinement. Blend and refine is the next phase once all of this is done. And you got to be careful. If you over blend, you're going to lose everything. So I will take a very dry brush, and in this case I am going to use the maul stick because I need real careful control. And I want these edges slightly blended. The edges of the image very slightly blended very slightly blended as they go around, because the trompe l'oeil also includes that feeling of atmosphere. So all the edges need to be softened as this moves around, like that. So we've got the trompe l'oeil painting this far. In the next quick tip, let's refine it. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com, where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.